Hello, it's me again. Yet another video that's pretty meaningful but won't get a lot of views for some reason. But hey, I'm not complaining, okay? As long as I'm entertaining the few people who take their time to watch these videos and subscribe to the channel, like you could do right now if this is your first time watching. So let's move on to the topic of today, which is who was right between Charles Xavier and Magneto? In the movies, of course, not the comics. I'm not going to touch on the comics because there are just way too many things for us to look at when it comes to the comics. We're going to mention the movie versions because they're, well, how can I say this? They don't have over 60 years of publication. The movies only started in 2000 and they ended with the release of New Mutants. Whenever you want to consider the release date, I would consider the original. Some people would say any one of the delayed dates or even the final one, which I don't even remember when it was. Side note, I didn't really like the movie, so I don't really care about it. Yeah. Anyway, for us to know who was right and who was wrong, we need to study their ideologies. First, we're gonna have to find out who these characters are, what their backstories are, and the conception of these characters, what they were modeled on, what they were based on, for us to have a better understanding of why one would be right and why the other one would be wrong. Of course, at the end of the day, you're going to have to make up your own mind about who's right and who's wrong. All I'm going to do is just help steer you in the right direction. Whichever direction you want to follow is up to you, again. So, Charles Xavier was shown in first class to have grown up in Westchester, New York, his mansion with his mother. Of course, we never actually get to see his mother because Mystique broke into the house and took her form, and we never actually see how he interacted with his mother or how she went about raising Mystique. Maybe Charles just made Mystique look like she wasn't there when they were growing up. Either way, we only got to see what his mother looked like, and we know she was alive, but we never actually got to see her. We only saw Mystique as her. So they grew up together as brother and sister. And in 1962, Charles met Magneto. After a little adventure they had with the Cuban Missile Crisis, they parted ways because they just couldn't see eye to eye on how to approach the mutant problem. I'm saying mutant problem because that's what it was called in the movies. Magneto, on the other hand, had a very different childhood from what Charles had. While Charles lived a life of comfort in his mansion with his adopted sister, in other words, Magneto was a Jew during the era of World War II. I don't have to explain why that just makes things drastically different, but we all know what the Jewish went through during that period. Magneto was separated from his parents as a child and sent to Auschwitz, where he was experimented on, not just by Sebastian Shaw, who was there in disguise. I don't really know why he was there. He was also experimented on by the Nazis, being a Jew as well as, being a mutant. Because we all saw that he bent the gate when he was trying to reach out to his parents because he didn't want to be separated from them. He also killed a few Nazis. We're not shown how he escaped from prison, but we know that eventually he got out and he was going on a quest for revenge, which we could say took him across the world. I don't really know if he did go across the world, but I do know he went as far as Argentina from Europe. As a side note, a lot of Nazis escaped to Argentina after World War II. That's probably what the movie was showing us. So, during his little quest for vengeance, he met Charles Xavier, and they became friends, where Charles taught him to access his powers through memories of love, kindness, compassion, whereas his powers were mostly fueled by rage and fear. He grew up with the impression that the only way for you to show your supremacy is through force. There was no equality. There always had to be someone on top, because that's just how it was for him. As a child, he was experimented on simply because of who he was, because of what his heritage was. Not only that, but the world started to fear mutants, and that he was a mutant as well. So that's double trouble for him. So during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he met Sebastian Shaw again, and he managed to kill him at the end of the adventure. But he also took up the ideology of mutant supremacy, because again, that's just how he grew up. He was taught that there always has to be a supreme force, that there is no equality, that there is just supremacy and inferiority. And considering that mutants are the next link in the evolutionary chain, you could kind of see where he's coming from. Not only because of the way he was raised, but because of basic biology. I mean, if we're going to look at it, I'm going to see a guy who can move things with his mind. And I'm just here, your average Joe. I'm not going to be able to realistically say and fully believe that I am equal to this person. I'm not. This person is clearly superior to me. And Magneto is already one of the most powerful mutants in the world. He controls magnetic fields. He creates magnetic fields. So you do see where he came from. And from this, I'm guessing you can see that he was based more on Malcolm X, who took a more aggressive and proactive approach to establishing, well, I can say human rights, or I could say black equality, or racial equality, or whatever you guys want to call it. Either way, his viewpoint contrasted Charles Xavier's. And that's where their debate comes from. Their upbringing, their experiences, and the way those things shaped their worldview. So, as a side note of something that I forgot to mention before this approach, we're also going to be looking at what happened in the movies for us to conclude who was right and who was wrong. So, we're going to start with X-Men 1. We're going by release order. So in X-Men 1, we see that humans fear mutants, their potential for harm, their potential for destruction and everything. And there's a law that's being debated about in which all mutants have to be registered and humans have to decide whether they want to coexist with mutants or not. Regardless of what mutant rights are, regardless of whether they have rights or not, because we don't really know if they do, this law is going to decide whether they are to be treated as people or as something else entirely. By the end of the movie, we see that nothing really has changed in the way that humans view mutants. But we do get some sort of progress because Senator Kelly managed to realize that maybe this law was wrong. Maybe humans aren't being fair towards the mutants. But then again, he died before he could do anything, so yeah. And in X-Men 2, we see that fear for mutancy hasn't really changed. It's pretty much the same as it was in X-Men 1. But towards the end of the movie, we see that the president has been convinced that not all mutants are bad. So it provides a kind of bright future. And this was all done because Charles managed to convince him to do it, not through show of force, but through words and diplomacy. In X-Men 3, we get to see that mutants actually have a place in the government now in the form of Hank McCoy being the Secretary of Mutant Affairs. So there's already progress. And this was all started because Charles Xavier managed to convince the president that mutants aren't all bad, that there are good ones and there are bad ones, just like humanity itself. We also get to see in X-Men 3 that they're able to differentiate between being a mutant terrorist and just a normal mutant. But then again, that's also taken aback by the fact that they created weapons to cure mutancy, that they also created just a cure that can be administered to any mutant out there. While, of course, this still left the element of choice to people, it also created the opportunity for moments in which somebody would feel intimidated by a mutant just for being there and then administer the cure to them via the weapon. It happens. That's kind of what relates to in terms of gun control in countries like the United States, with all these shootings that happen and all of these gang wars and, well, you know. So, did it really improve after Charles spoke to the president? Did things improve, or did they just go about it in a different way, which was still equally bad? In my view, I believe that things did improve. Actually, they got a mutant into the government, and, well, he's blue. There's no hiding it. Everybody knew that he's a mutant. In X-Men Origins, which goes back in time, it's supposed to be 15 years before X-Men 1, but for some reason it's like more than 20. But that's not for me to think about. The mutants aren't really known by the public. There are some that know them. There are some that freak out at what they do, like how everybody in Vietnam was freaking out over the abilities of Victor and Logan. But we don't really get to see how humanity sees them exactly. We then go back in time to 1962 in X-Men First Class, and we see that the government has started to realize that mutants do exist. But then we don't really see how they react to it until the end, or until that scene in the middle of the movie when Charles exposes himself as a mutant. They don't really believe it until they see it, and when they do, they're freaked out by it. And in the end, Americans and Russians both fired at the mutant forces on the beach. Regardless of what they were or whose side they were on, they didn't care. They just fired at them. It goes like that saying from the, well, Snyderverse movies. People fear what they don't understand. Then we go on to the Wolverine, where Logan goes to Japan, and we don't really get to see much of how humans view mutants at that point. We just get to see how the Japanese view Logan, and they see him as a lesser form of life because he's a mutant. And there's Yukio as well, who's also a mutant. But we don't really get to see that explicitly. We just kind of get that feeling that they don't really have regard for mutants. But we also see through Yashida that they don't just have a problem with Logan because he's a mutant, but because he's a foreigner as well. That's actually the only way we get to see how the Japanese view mutants. I know that it's generalization, but it's just very good insight into what the general population is like in Japan. I'm not saying that they're all cold-hearted and would kill their daughters just so they can get their father's money. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the way he views Logan could be an example of how the Japanese view mutants. We then move on to X-Men Days of Future Past, my favorite entry in the X-Men universe. We see here that the Sentinels have taken over the world and have all but wiped out mutantkind. They're unstoppable. They just absolutely massacre any mutant that they find. It's even a wonder that there still are X-Men there, because these things are just scary. They are terrifying. They're just something you wouldn't be able to sleep so well knowing that they're hunting you. No matter how powerful you are, you know that this thing can just adapt to everything you do and kill you. So we get to see through exposition of the movie that the Sentinels were created after the murder of Bolivar Trask by Mystique. At first they only targeted mutants, but then they started targeting humans because humans would eventually give birth to mutants. And when they ran out of humans who would eventually give birth to mutants, they started hunting down humans who would give birth to humans who would give birth to mutants, and so on and so on. So basically, every organic being on Earth was going to be wiped out because at some point they were going to give birth to mutants. So this made humans stand with the mutants and try to fight back against the Sentinels. And it was just a massacre. Almost the whole world was wiped out by this, because of this. And through that show of force, it united humans and mutants. It also brought together Charles and Magneto. They actually worked together without Magneto having any ulterior motives. In the future, that is. In the past, of course, they were still young and brash, and they still had the opportunity to shape the future in whatever way they wanted. This is where Magneto said, well, you know what? We're just going to have to show them how powerful we are, and I'm going to go kill the president to show them that they shouldn't create these things. I mean, they killed that businessman and they created these things. I'm just going to go kill the head of the country, and that will stop them from creating these things to feel safe with. And Charles was like, no, we're going to have to show them a better way. We're going to have to talk things out. We're going to have to convince them peacefully that we just want to coexist. And Magneto's like, no, we're just going to go and show them how powerful we are. They're going to have to be afraid of us. Again, his whole mentality is based on show of force, show of power, because that's all he believes in, supremacy. Charles believes in equality because he grew up with Raven, the homeless girl. He took her in because he didn't see himself as superior to her. He saw her as an equal of his that he needed to help. And in the end of the movie, we see that things have actually improved for everybody. Mutants are living in peace, the X-Men are happy, Cyclops and Jean are back, everybody's back, and it's just a really happy ending for everyone, except for Wolverine in the past, because he's been captured and will now go through the whole Weapon X thing. But we see that in the end, Charles found him and he became part of the X-Men. Let's fast forward to Logan, because all the other movies serve as prequels and they pretty much rehash what's been going on with time. So we'll move on to Logan, where we see that no new mutant has been born for over 20 years. Why does this happen, you ask? Because a human managed to put a chemical in the food that's distributed throughout the country and probably the world that nullifies the mutant X gene and stops it from being passed on to the next generation. The person behind this was Xander Rice, a guy whose father Wolverine killed when he was escaping the Weapon X program. And we see that because no mutants were born, all the other ones were just dying out. Then there's the fact that Charles killed off his X-Men, and Wolverine is the only one left. We also get to see that the world just really moved on from mutants. They don't really care about them anymore. They don't talk about mutants that much. All they do is just mention the Westchester incident where Charles killed his beloved X-Men, which is seriously very dark. And we also get to learn that mutants hadn't been born in over 20 years. Now, why everyone was so happy at the end of Days of Future Past, despite there not having been born mutants for 20 years at that point, it goes beyond me, but hey, that's the X-Men universe for you. You get so many questions about certain things that never really are answered. We just have to put them together on our own, whether they make sense or not. These explanations are. So, at the end of the day, we saw that mutants, they get wiped out by humans. So who actually was right at the end of the day? We've seen all of these movies and how these things play out. So who was right between Charles and Magneto? We know both of their approaches, and we know that both of them want peace for mutant kind. But who had a point? Who was right? Let me just go into it. In both of the final futures we saw, the one in Days of Future Past and the one in Logan, we see different results, but they all stem from the same thing. humans were cruel towards mutants and they wanted to be the top of the food chain, preserve their place there. And as a result, it led to mutants being destroyed and then humans. That is, in Days of Future Past, because the Sentinels started hunting down humans as well, who would later give birth to mutants. But before that happened, the humans had pretty much won the war against mutants, the war against evolution. But then it just got so bad for them that they sided with mutants, and the mutants had to find a way to change history, which they did. But what did that lead to? It just led to a better way of exterminating mutant kind, which is what Xander Rice did. So if you think about how Charles had his chance twice, because in almost all the movies, Charles was the one who prevailed over Magneto's plans of mutant supremacy, we get to see that Charles was getting his way all along. But up until the end, in Logan at least, we see that Charles's way actually failed. But then, what if Magneto was the one who had been winning? What if Magneto used his show of force and got away with it? Would humans still try to rebel against mutant kind, or would they just accept their place in the food chain? Magneto's goal was to create a peaceful world for mutants. Anybody who got in his way would die. Anybody who tried to get in his way would die. Anybody who would try to convince people to get in his way would die. Of course, it's not right to say that might is right, but we also have to take into consideration that humans were very stubborn in this universe. Well, they are stubborn even in real life, but they don't well, how can I say? They don't enact genocide on the basis of trying to preserve their place in the world. So, if Magneto had had his way, if he killed the president back in the 70s, it would have created a war between humans and mutants, which obviously mutants would win if they all followed Magneto's instructions. I mean, he controls magnetic fields. What could you do against a mutant like that? If Charles sided with Magneto, it would have been a very peaceful world for mutants. Of course, without humans, but it would have been a peaceful world for mutants. If Charles rebelled against Magneto, which he did, he would have won, of course, and we'd end up with the future that we got. Magneto told Charles time and time again that his way is the best way, and Charles said no. He went for the harder way, which at the end of the day didn't pay off, because not only did Charles himself kill his people, but Weapon X managed to just wipe them out in the most discreet way possible. You can't even sue them for anything because, well, you wouldn't be able to find out what they did. And that's just the end of it. That's the end. At the end of Logan, we don't get natural born mutants, we get the fabricated ones by the Weapon X program. So basically they did it. After Wolverine died, they just have artificial mutants. Real ones don't exist anymore. And they never will because the X gene has been expunged from humanity. And that's the end of it. So, in conclusion to this video, I would say Magneto was the one who was right all along. Anyway, thanks for listening to this 20-minute video, which talked about why Magneto was right, but disguised itself as trying to establish a chance in which Charles could be right, which he absolutely was not. Either way, please subscribe to my channel, please like the video, please leave a comment, or you can leave counter arguments as well, saying why Charles was right, or you could try to go the easy way and say that both of them were right in their own way, which I still don't believe in. I say that Magneto was right all the way. Charles was just wrong. He had the right idea, but he had to take into consideration humanity's attitude towards everything, which is weird because he's a telepath, but he just didn't see it. Yeah. So I'll see you next time with another video, and it will probably be in May, which is Star Wars month. So you're gonna get 4 videos in May, all with Star Wars content. So celebrate, rejoice, and may the Force in the future be with you. But for now, well, let's hope that the next incarnation of X-Men have better luck than the Fox Force. So, not gonna take any more of your time, and I'll say goodbye.